Johnny Mac, 97.3 ESPN.com, Sports Illustrated. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as a lot of NFL stuff to get into, including some Eagles stuff, which I don't know if it's too much a surprise, but we'll start with the Alshon Jeffery news today. Jeff McClain from the Inquirer reporting, John, that the Eagles started shopping Alshon Jeffries in October, which is about a month after they signed him to an extension. It was almost like they had buyer's remorse right away, but it sounds as if Howie Roseman was looking to get out of this thing right off the bat. I mean, I don't know that this is like breaking, shocking news, but the mindset of I signed him to this deal and then decided, maybe we made a mistake. That's the shocking part.
Yeah, you must have read my Sports Illustrated lead because I led with buyer's remorse, and that's pretty clearly what happened. And that kind of lines up with what I've been saying on this show a lot. The Eagles, everyone focuses on the Josina Anderson stuff, and understandably so. I get why, but I've heard pretty consistently from the Eagles and people around the team that the bigger issue is the fact that they saw a real significant descent from a player evaluation standpoint, in the fact that they just thought this guy was one of those players that we talk about, how quickly the NFL moves, kind of fell off the table. It was a really good player who all of a sudden wasn't a really good player, and the Eagles made that decision early in the season. That's where that timing lines up, and they quickly said, oh, we made a mistake.
Wow.
You talk about a guy who, let's be honest, the strengths of his game were his big body, his ability to catch the contested balls, the catching radius, the back shoulder stuff, all that kind of stuff. Speed was never a big part of his game, but there's a big difference from being functionally fast enough to play to the position and then being just too slow to be able to do anything. And that's where the Eagles were with Alshon Jeffery.
The irony of all this is one of his last games, he had 9 catches for 137 yards, 15 yards a catch, a touchdown. That was the game against Miami. So it looked like maybe he was healthy, maybe he was coming back and getting back on track. That's not to deter from anything that the Eagles thought, because he was not playing very well leading up to that. But it just seems so crazy that, so correct me if I'm wrong here, John. The timeline kind of reads as they restructured this deal and made most of his money a signing bonus. And what it did was make the money fully guaranteed for 2020. He had no money guaranteed for this year. They could have got rid of him.
Yeah. But they thought, and that's the mistake. They said to themselves, well, Alshon's locked in. He's going to be a part of our team for this season, certainly, and for next season. And then the goal was, you draft J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, he interns, and then he's ready to replace him in 2021. That was the Eagles' plan, and that's how they were going about it. So, Howie was trying to create a little bit of space, as he usually does, and the way you do that is to rework contracts. You give players the money you're going to give them anyway up front, and then you're able to put a couple voidable years on the back end, and you could spread everything out. That's his time-tested trick. That's what he always does. That's what he consistently does, and he will continue to do so. The mistake isn't the contract. The mistake is the evaluation and the belief that, okay, this guy's locked in, this guy's a big part of our offense for the next 2 years. We're going to pay him anyway, so let's just help out our cap a little bit. That's where the mistake was made. He wasn't going to help them. He didn't help them much last year. You mentioned one of the few upticks in his game, but he was playing, certainly for his standards, not having a good season before the injury, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. And he also had a nagging injury as well, besides the Liz Frank. So he was a declining player. They made a mistake on the evaluation, and they thought he was going to be around for 2 years, and They made a mistake.
Yeah, well, the mistake now has them only after a month. They guaranteed his $15.4 million cap hit for 2020, and now you got a guy who, John, I guess they're not anticipating to even be ready for the start of the year. I mean, if there is a start of the year, but he would not be there regardless.
No, the timing of that injury, I mean, it would be we've seen, I think people are a little bit too slavish to those typical sort of rehab schedules because there are certain players. Brandon Brooks would be a perfect example. Nobody thought he would be ready and playing at a high level by week one. Forget about a high level. I mean, it's astonishing a 350-pound guy would be able to come back from an Achilles tear and be ready and be 100% ready to go week one. But he was. And he had his best season, technically, till he got hurt again in week 17. So, there's always the chance that he has a good rehab and is ready to go week one. But it certainly would be, even in a typical off season where he had on-field work, there was no way he was going to be ready for any of that. The best-case scenario would be week one. Probably the more realistic scenario is closer to mid-season, and that's one of the reasons he's so difficult to trade.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with, so what are the scenarios for him now that this is out there? I mean, hey, they were trying to trade him, and it sounds like he was hearing the rumblings, and it caused, I don't know, I mean, is that a possible light at the end of the tunnel that, hey, he heard these rumblings and it was weighing on him and he wasn't playing well, or is that just wishful thinking?
I think that part of it is wishful thinking. I think the part of it that's real is that, people, and I go back to those comments again, people mainly focus on the Carson Wentz part of those comments, but there were also shots at Howie Roseman for not making more of an effort to acquire Jalen Ramsey. And that now, in hindsight, probably makes a little bit more sense because he's upset at the general manager who's trying to trade him. So that part of it fits, I think, a little bit better. As far as was he playing poorly because he's on the trade market? I don't think so. This is a veteran player who's been through the ringer, not only here, but in Chicago before he got here. Mm-hmm. So I don't think from a playing standpoint, I don't think it would have affected him that much.
Yeah, I mean, he said, he quickly found out he was on the block, and then that further kind of helped the divide between him and the team. And then, as you mentioned, everybody kind of just kept insinuating that he was the guy. I don't know, did you ever walk around that building feeling that the front office and the players had a disconnect with Alshon?
Alshon's a tough guy to read typically because he doesn't talk a lot. He's very soft-spoken. Kind of weird for a receiver. They're usually the exact opposite. But he's certainly not the most talkative guy and to his teammates as well. So it's not like he's just looking at the media. There's certain guys, Brandon Graham being the most obvious example. He's the life of the party. He's always smiling, always cracking jokes, always talking to everybody. Alshon kind of keeps to himself, but he always kept to himself since he got here. He's just a quiet guy. It's interesting, on clean-out day, he was in the hallway joking around with Carson Wentz. So I do think part of that was overblown, that they hate each other or they can't coexist or that kind of stuff. I think that's over-examined. I think, there are certain things I've heard about that discussion that might explain things a little bit better, but to be honest, I can't talk about them. But I don't think it's hatred of the quarterback, and he just dislikes him to that point. I don't think that's part of the equation.
The most likely scenario still remains, John. Alshon Jeffery is with the Eagles at some point, and the hope is that he just had a bad year and that he's back and healthy and helps his team out. I guess that's the best case scenario because it sounds as if they ain't moving this contract.
I think he's not going to be here. I still think that.
Wow.
I still think ultimately that the Eagles, and it's been explained to me pretty consistently, they want a young receiver in here to grow with Carson Wentz from day one. And that's part of the reason they didn't do a full court press on some of the trade markets or even the free agent guys, the Robbie Anderson types, who are okay, but they're not great. They want somebody to sort of grow with Carson Wentz from day one. And you look at the draft coming up and the receivers and how good they are. Ultimately, I think they're going to pick a receiver in the first round of the draft. And from that standpoint, you say, okay, if you're going to pick somebody in the first round, this might be an atypical year, as we talked about, but you still want to get them on the field as quickly as possible. You're still hoping Deshaun Jackson is going to be healthy. He's going to be on the field. You still have a second-round pick from last year that this team wants to succeed. So even though the fans have given up on them, the Eagles haven't given up on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. You still have Greg Ward. Where does Alshon fit? Ultimately, I don't think they want him here, and if they have to, they'll cut him. But they're hoping to convince somebody to take the contract. No question about that.
All right, that'll be an interesting thing. Draft day? I mean, is that a possibility, or is this something that doesn't happen until you get into training camp? Much like a couple of years ago, you find somebody with a Ronald Darby. I got Jordan Matthews. You don't like your guy. I don't like my guy. You're probably getting a guy back with a lot of money in that scenario, but is that more likely, or is draft day more likely?
Yeah, I would think more from the environment we're in, and Alshon's not healthy, so everybody knows he's not healthy. Everybody knows he wouldn't be ready to go for OTAs or mini camps, even if you had them, even if you were able to have them. They can't get their doctors to look at him. So if we do get to the all clear, if we get to training camp, and it's becoming clearer that he's getting healthier and maybe he'll be back, say, by week 2, week 3, early in the season, and then you could have your doctors look at him. Maybe something could work out at that part of the calendar.
Right.
But, yeah, it's going to be real difficult. And I think, how long do you want to go with it if you're Howie Roseman? How many waves does Alshon create? If he's not going to create any waves, you can wait as long as you want.
Yeah, I mean, let's ask this then. After this season, let's say you keep him, he comes back and plays half the year. What's the contract status after this year? I mean, are they then free to cut ties and move on?
Yeah, essentially, with minimal impact, yeah, it would be no issue. Every contract in the NFL, let's be honest, I think Joel Corey does a great job of this. He went through it with the high-level free agents. It's really, you hear the numbers, Byron Jones getting the biggest deal, obviously, in free agency. But the real effect of it is how early can you get out of the contract.
Yeah.
Typically, the Eagles don't want to go past 2 years, don't want to go into that third year, that if things go horribly wrong, you can get out of that deal without minimal impact by the third year. It's one of the reasons they tapped out on Byron Jones, because the Dolphins just went too far. Mm-hmm. In the case of Alshon, again, we go all the way back to the beginning of this discussion. They made the assumption that it was going to be a big part of their offense through this season. That was the mistake. It was always the plan. Even if things went well, that probably by 2021 he wouldn't be here.
All right, Football at 4, Johnny Mac at JF McMullen on Twitter. Give him a follow there, of course, for all the football. A couple other things. What do you make of this whole Zoom, the drafts, and I guess Harbaugh is one of the guys that came out. I read something today from, I guess it was Drew Hanlon, the shot guy that worked with Fultz, that he was doing a virtual, clinic, and that somebody broke in and put inappropriate videos on the screen with the kids. I mean, there's some concern that I guess the NFL guys are concerned that other teams are going to hack in and get some of their information. Is that a legit problem?
Yeah, I did. NFL coaches, and I like John Harbaugh a lot. I think he's a real smart. I mean, they act like this stuff is CIA level. You know, who's going to hack into your – now, you're more likely to find some idiot that you just mentioned that's going to do something like that. And, you know, you hear about all these doorbell cameras. I'm sure you've seen those stories where people hack in and they take over.
Here's the tweet, John. This is Drew Hanlon. He was the guy that worked with Fultz, if you remember. He's a shot guy. Had over 100 kids working hard on their games via a free Zoom meeting, and multiple people jumped on and started sharing inappropriate videos, so we had to end it. Sorry to all the hoopers who had their workout session cut short due to a few immature losers.
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is always a big issue. We think the NFL understands that, and they're going to have something in place. I certainly hope so. But as far as John, and as far as saying, oh, is there another team that – what are they going to do? They're going to hack into your plans or hack into what you're saying and say, oh, the Ravens want this guy. We're going to jump up and steal him. I mean, that's what I say about NFL coaches. I mean, God bless them. And this is not just John Harbaugh. They all think this stuff is just high-level, you know, DEFCON 1 security. It's not. It's a draft. Just do it.
Yeah, just do the draft, you know, and by the way, you know, it's the one thing that people are kind of looking forward to. Now, does the baseball news today do anything for football, or football already thinks they're coming back, but does that make you feel like, if baseball's going to play games? Because today the Ohio governor on football in September says, I just don't know. We know that the Washington, the California governor doesn't seem all that, ready to start saying that, there's going to be football games being played. But does baseball coming back, even if it's just quarantined into one state, do anything here?
I don't think so, because I don't think the NFL, and I can't imagine they would embrace that kind of environment to where you would play at a neutral site and no fans and all that kind of stuff. That's not the goal for this league. And only under a necessity, I think, would they ever do that. Now, you could argue that necessity is going to exist, and then I think they would revisit it. But I certainly don't think it would be plan A, B, C, D, E, or F, never mind, something they would seriously consider at this point in the calendar, at least.
All right, a couple other things nationally here. Yannick Ngakoue, he's, this morning looking for a team with a great culture. There's all sorts of Eagle rumors out there still. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Thoughts there, or are they going to play this like they did with Jalen Ramsey?
Yeah, they want significant assets back. And it's pretty clear that Yannick doesn't want to be there, so that's not the issue. I think ultimately they'll have to move on. But, yeah, I mean, half of these rumors. I think somebody tweeted a rumor at both of us yesterday. I think that one had the Eagles getting Ngakoue and the 9th overall pick. And, I mean, why is Jacksonville going to do that?
Yes.
What is the Jacksonville GM from draft day? Is he real? Is he the team? I mean, you're going to throw in Rasul Douglas in the 2nd round pick, and they're going to switch 1st round picks with you, and you're getting Yannick Ngakoue. I mean, God bless Eagles fans. They dream up.
Somebody texted that in to ask you, and I said I refuse to ask you unless they got me some credible source, because I could not throw that kind of question your way, that it just wouldn't be fair. But I said, why the heck would Jacksonville give you the 9th pick in the draft?
I mean, come on. I mean, there's bad trades, and there's always bad trades. And I always say it only takes one. I mean, the real stuff of the Ngakoue stuff is he actively is trying to leave Jacksonville, and he's actively been on social media indicating that Philadelphia would be certainly probably the place that he wants to come for whatever reason. Now, Stephon Diggs got it done. It's capable of being done. He wanted out of Minnesota. He went on social media. He got it done. But, that's a good player. Look at the haul the Vikings got. Mm-hmm. If Jacksonville trades Ngakoue at arguably, 24 years old at the second most important position in football behind quarterback, it's going to cost a lot.
Why? Or I know why. Okay, but why and what's the deal with Clowney?
$20 million. He just wants an outrageous amount of money. He's also has some injury issues, so people are concerned. More than the core muscle, I think he played through that last year. I think a lot of people had a lot of respect for that. But he's had that microfracture surgery in his knee. He's got a degenerative knee since very early in the process. Everybody understands that. And then as dominant as he can be at times, and he just looks like a monster, the consistency has never been there. The huge production. You look at that guy and say, how does he not get 15 sacks by mistake? He's never gotten more than, I think, 8.5 or 9, I think is his high. So the production doesn't match the traits. And he wants to be essentially the highest paid edge rusher in football, which, as I just explained, is a premier position. So you're talking a ton of money. And he's just been unrealistic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he was one of those guys that when you saw the video, the hype was just so ridiculous because of the one hit when he knocked the guy's helmet off. And it was like, all right, I see that one play, but can you give me some more? Not that he wasn't a very good college player. He was. But that play just got showed over and over and over again. And you thought you were getting this like a Reggie White-esque player, and that just has not materialized.
And that's why you can't get hung up on highlights. Everybody gets hung up on highlights, and I tell them all the time. Scouts and real personnel people, Adam Kaplan, our good buddy, has been going off on this recently on Twitter and his show. With, you don't look at highlights. In fact, that's the last thing you should look at. Look at the bad plays. And if the bad plays are good, And by that, I mean, are you doing the right thing? Are you in the right position? Everybody in the NFL is going to get beat. These are high-level players you're playing against each and every week. But if the ceiling is a lot higher than, if the floor is a lot higher than other people's floors,
yep,
that means you're really, really good. And everybody focuses on those highlights. Don't focus on the highlights.
Yeah, I agree with that. And normally the hype, you can't match it. So don't get overly excited. But Clowney, him, Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, they're some of the bigger names still out there. The Clowney thing is really interesting because, he got traded last year, and Seattle doesn't seem to be interested in picking him up either. And he helped them. I mean, obviously helped them win the game against the Eagles, but they don't seem all that excited to bring him back. So real quick, I do think Seattle wants him back. They wanted him back, but they want him back at a decent price. At the price, right.
They've consistently said, but again, early in the process, which is ridiculous at this point, he was looking at 18 to 20 million a year.
Now, has he since lowered that?
Well, we don't know. I assume it's been lowered, but just because of the realism of the situation. I mean, free agency has slowed to a crawl at this stage, as it always does. You have the different waves, the different phases. So I think it's pretty clear to Clowney in this camp that they're not going to get what they wanted. So now, and there's a lot of edge rushers on the market. And you talk about Ngakoue. Seattle is one of the teams that have been in those trade discussions as well because they want an edge rusher. And then you have somebody like Everson Griffin who's older, 32, so he's got to kind of wait for what happens with Clowney, what happens with Ngakoue, and then he'll land somewhere. But there's a lot of good edge rushers, especially at this stage.
I didn't ask you this yesterday, but it looks like the NFL is almost certainly getting rid of that pass interference rule.
Yeah, they should. I mean, it was a disaster. But I think the disaster was, as usual with the NFL, was the messaging. They had a mindset of what they wanted to do. And all that was to prevent what happened in the NFC Championship game with the Saints and the Rams. And New Eagle, Nickel Roby-Coleman, was in that play. He was the guy who committed pass interference. It was egregious, and they wanted to be able to overturn that type of penalty. But they didn't explain it, and everyone, as we predicted on the show, you can go back to old shows, we predicted way back in training camp, this is going to create more problems because you're going to have fans. And what do fans do, Mike? I mean, let's be honest. If the loyalty is to the color of the jersey, and if something looks like pass interference against your team, you're going to scream to high heaven, and vice versa. If it's on your team, you're going to scream to high heaven. It's going to be totally different viewpoints. So everybody was slowing down every single pass interference call, which is a judgment call, and you can argue half of them each way. And they were saying, this is pass interference. This is pass interference. How could you not overturn this? They only wanted to overturn the most egregious pass interferences, but they didn't explain that. And the whole thing was just, it was doomed to be a failure from moment one.
All right, Football at 4 in the books for Tuesday at J.F. McMullen. More at 97.3ESPN.com, Sports Illustrated, and he, like all guests, appear to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, man, he'll be back tomorrow. More Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash.